My name is Lucy Hollands. I'm one of the senior associates here at Debenhams Ottoway, and my main role here is court protection. So I deal with all lasting powers of attorneys, deputyships, and any kind of contested applications, the statutory wills. So today, what we thought we'd talk about is obviously the understanding of deputyships, what it is, who can be a deputy, the application, any kind of tips that I can give you, the strengths and challenges of deputyship, the practical use, and also I've devised, I'm hoping, a very helpful workflow that you can go through for your own personal use, and also the future of deputyships and what it's looking like. So before we jump into the session regarding understanding deputyships, I just wanted to introduce you to Riley and Alex. So they're made-up characters, they're made-up service users that I thought would assist with the session with going through in terms of how a deputyship application would work. So if you are completely don't have any understanding of deputyship orders, they are court orders which allows a named person known as a deputy to assist someone who lacks capacity. So that can be either on finances, but also health and welfare. So we have two case studies here today. So we've got Riley, who's a 25-year-old, have a learning disability, living in a supported living placement, receives benefit and has family who provides support on an ongoing basis. We also have Alex, who is an 86-year-old, has dementia, a diagnosis of dementia, living within a care home, has their own property, also has an investment portfolio and has family around to support. So as we continue through these slides, we'll look back on Riley and Alex to discuss why deputyship may be beneficial for them, how the application process would work, and go from there. So in terms of deputyship, what is a deputy and who can be one? So a deputy is somebody who's appointed by the Court of Protection to make decisions for somebody who lacks capacity. So a deputy comes in and manages their affairs, if it's a financial deputy, or their health and welfare decisions. So to be a deputy, you must be aged over 18 with mental capacity. You can be a close relative or friend. However, if somebody doesn't have anybody that's willing or able, then you could look at having a professional deputy. I'm not sure, you may have heard the word professional deputies before. So for finances, to have a professional deputy, there are certain criteria, which I'll explore later on in the slides. But if there's not a professional deputy that's been able to take on the role either, then you can look at a panel deputy. So again, you may have heard this term, but a panel deputy is when an application is made to court and the court appoints a local solicitor. So they look at a list of local solicitors and the court picks one. The list of solicitors provided is monitored by the Office of Public Guardian, and they have strict rules as to who can apply. With regarding deputyships, obviously the person who is going to be named deputy has to be trustworthy, and they have to act in the person's best interests. So they can also have more than one deputy. And when we advise clients, we always say it's always better to have more than one, if that's a possibility, just in terms of succession planning. But we say not more than probably 3 or 4, because you don't want to have too many people named. But that is a question we get regularly in terms of, can you have more than one? In terms of health and welfare, if, again, there's no one willing or able to be a professional deputy for health and welfare, then you can have an experienced solicitor to be named, but these are less likely and less common than you would have your financial deputy. So who's involved in the decision making? So there's 3 parties. You have the individual. So in court of protection, this individual is known as P. So this is the person who lacks capacity and requires the additional support. So requires their management of their finances, but also in terms of their health and welfare decisions. The next is the deputy. So this is the named person who's going to be appointed on P's behalf by the Court of Protection to act. And then the last party is the Court of Protection. So the Court of Protection is the court who deal with issues where a person lacks capacity, and that can be both financial and also welfare matters. So when making an application to the court, and for a court order, a deputyship order, to be successful, the Court of Protection has to agree with the application. And there's 3 points. So the court has to agree that the person lacks capacity. So I'll go through the forms in a moment, but you have to have that evidence that they lack capacity, so in terms of a diagnosis. Then the court has to be satisfied that it's in the person's best interest for a deputy to be appointed. So there has to be a need for that person to be appointed. And then it has to be in the best interest for that specific person to be appointed. So whether it's a family member, a relative, or a professional deputy, the court needs to have evidence as to why that particular person it's in their best interest to be appointed. In terms of powers of a deputy, and leading on from the previous slides, there's two difference. So I touched on it previously. So you've got your property and financial affairs deputy, which is mainly your financials, and then you've got your personal welfare. So that's your health and welfare deputy, and they are completely separate. Okay, so depending on what you want to apply for, it's two completely separate applications, and it's most likely to be reviewed by two different judges. So a financial deputy, obviously they will be appointed when someone lacks capacity, and the financial deputy can assist with things like paying bills, management of a home, selling a home, entering into a tenancy agreement, a benefit review, for example. Whereas your health and welfare, it's more like decisions about people's health. So it could be, or social care. So it could be where they live, who they have contact with, what clothes they might wear, and what they can eat, and their general care and well-being. So if we just look back at Alex and Riley in our case studies, in terms of why a financial deputy may be beneficial for Riley, say, who's our 25-year-old with the learning disability living in supported living, a supported living placement, potentially we might be looking at a new tenancy agreement that he needs to enter to move placements. You might be looking at bills to say if there's any sort of service charge associated with the supported living placement. And also, given his age, he's 25 years old, he might be due to receive inheritance from his grandparents or his parents, say, that is further than any sort of benefits. So it's just about looking at it, okay, in terms of a financial deputy, what can they assist with that person who lacks capacity in terms of decisions that they're unable to make. And again, Alex, who's our 86-year-old with dementia living in a care home, a financial deputy would be able to help with paying his care home fees, sell his property if required, and also manage his investment portfolio. So make sure it's in his best interest of how it's being managed. In terms of financial applications for deputyship, it has a very high success rate, as long as the forms are completed properly, correctly, and the court is satisfied with it. It's largely paper-based, so it's very, very rare we get a hearing listed, and I'll go through the forms shortly. For personal welfare applications, the court is less likely to grant these, as the court's view is that a deputy is not typically required to make everyday decisions. So usually, if you have a person that is they're carrying on their life as they go, they don't have a series of medical appointments, or they don't have a very serious medical condition, usually the family and the medical professionals can make best interest decisions on a daily basis. So the court see it as there's no real reason to have a health and welfare deputy in place. Saying that, at Debenhams Ottoway, as Rachel mentioned earlier, Tammy Woods, who is our court protection manager, she's made a number of health and welfare deputyship applications and been very successful in doing them. So the court do make them, but we have to be able to evidence as to why it's required. In terms of when people are considering deputyships, I've drafted this workflow, and I hope you can see it properly and it's not too small. But I would advise that you use this workflow when you're considering a financial deputyship for someone that you know, in terms of a relative or a close friend. It's a really helpful financial deputyship decision tool to work out, actually, is a financial deputyship required? So if we start from the top, so you're looking at basically, does the person have capacity regarding property and affairs? So there's a slight typo there in terms of, are they over 16? But you're looking at, does the person have capacity? So if the person has capacity, then yes, you can then take consent from them to help them, or you can look at creating this lasting power of attorney. So your lasting power of attorney is something you can do when the person has capacity. So when somebody has capacity, they can then appoint somebody, and you can name them as an attorney in a document, and then you can help them manage their finances. But that document has to be registered with the Office of Public Guardian. Okay, so the LPA, the clear distinction is the lasting power of attorney is when someone has capacity and can make a lasting power of attorney to appoint someone to help them. And that can then stay, once it's registered, that then stays in place when the person lacks capacity. Okay, but the deputyship is, unfortunately, when it's too late to make a lasting power of attorney. So the person already lacks capacity, whether it's due to a diagnosis or whether the person has never had capacity to make a lasting power of attorney. So in terms of a deputyship, you're looking at when the person lacks capacity. So the first thing is, person lacks capacity. Does the person have capacity? You'd go no, okay, because you wouldn't be thinking about a deputyship in the first place anyway. You'd say no. And then you'd look at, okay, well, is there an LPA for finances? So if you don't know, and if you have no idea, you can make an OPG 100, which is a form online. If you just Google OPG 100, it provides you with a form that you can then fill out, and it searches the Office of Public Guardian Register, which then comes back to state whether there's an LPA, so a lasting power of attorney, in place, or whether there's a deputyship in place. So if the person can't tell you, or you're not aware, you can do this report for free. So in terms of, you do your OPG 100, or you find out whether there's an LPA. So if there's a yes, then the attorneys can act under that LPA. So your attorney is a bit like your deputy, but it's under the lasting power of attorney. So they can act for you subject to any restrictions that might be in the LPA. Okay, if there's no LPA, then you go down that. Then you look at, okay, what kind of assets does the person have? If it's clearly benefits only, so they're living in a supported living and there's nothing else that needs to be managed in any way, then you go benefits only, go down, and the appointee can act for them. So the appointee is somebody who's noted by the DWP who manages benefits on that person's behalf. Okay. If obviously the person has more than benefits. So as I mentioned earlier, in Riley's case, for example, the 25-year-old in supported living, he is only on benefits. So on the face of it, it looks like he wouldn't need a deputyship. However, he's wanting potentially to move to another supported living, and he's needing to give notice on his current supported living to move to another supported living. So he'd need to then enter into a tenancy agreement, which an appointee doesn't have legal authority to do. Also, he may be inheriting some sort of inheritance from his grandparents. So again, he wouldn't have capacity to receive that as part of probate. So on the face of it, it might seem like somebody is only receiving benefits and no deputyship is required, but it's just have a bit more of a think regarding that. And so if it's more than benefits, then a financial deputyship is required. So that's when you look at, you now need to do the application, you need the order, but you're now looking at who is appropriate and willing and able to be that person. So if the person has family members or a close relative, a close friend who can be that deputy, absolutely great. We can look at doing a lay deputyship application. And we deal with many clients that come and we help them do the forms. We go through the forms with them and we make the application on their behalf. So this is when you've got somebody that you're then evidencing to the court and you're standing up saying, yeah, I'm happy to be deputy for my brother, son, husband, whoever it is. Okay. If unfortunately this person is unbefriended and they don't have anybody, then you're going to have to look at a professional financial deputyship. So this is when you look at, okay, well, who professionally can be named as the deputy? So first of all, obviously, we've got Hertfordshire County Council. So Hertfordshire County Council has a criteria where the criteria is they will only consider it if they've got no property, they have simple assets, and they're not CHC funded. So Catherine, I'm hoping you'll correct me if that's incorrect. But that's the criteria. Obviously, they will review it on a case-by-case basis, but that is the standard criteria. In terms of Debenhams Ottoway, criteria for being professional deputy is that there needs to be either a property or an investment portfolio. So something more complex that needs to be managed, that's when we become involved. If the case drops in between, so if it doesn't catch between the HCC's position or Debenhams Ottoway position, then you can look to apply for a panel deputy. So in terms of the panel deputy, as I explained earlier, that's when an application can be made to the court, and the court will then appoint somebody from a list. So Debenhams Ottoway are on a list, and we would then get an order from the court to appoint us as a panel deputy rather than making our own application. So I thought it would be helpful just to run this through with the two case studies. So if we run this through with Alex, just to bring this up to help you to apply it. In terms of Alex, obviously he has dementia. I know that doesn't necessarily confirm that he lacks capacity in this area, but he has been confirmed by a medical professional that he lacks capacity with regarding his finances. So he doesn't have capacity, so we'd say no. Is there an LPA for finances? We did our OPG 100 and it came back that no, he does not have an LPA in place or a current deputyship. So we'll go no. Benefits only. We know that Alex has property and an investment portfolio. So that would be no. Your financial deputyship required. At that point, you would be having conversations with the family or close friends to say, this is the situation. We need to make the application. Are you willing and able, or would you like a professional deputy to be appointed? Okay. In terms of Riley, Riley's slightly a bit more complex in terms of, obviously, Riley, 25-year-old, has LD. Again, that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily, we shouldn't assume obviously he lacks capacity in this area, but it has been confirmed by the medical professionals that he does. So he doesn't have capacity. So no, there's no LPA in place because unfortunately he's never had the capacity to make an LPA. So benefits only. Again, in terms of benefits, on the face of it, it looks like Riley only has benefits, but you just need to have a think about, okay, but what else? Is there a tenancy agreement? Is there any kind of money that he may come into contact with? Just I think round that. And then in terms of if a financial deputyship is required, who would be that appropriate person? Does he have family or friends that could be that person? Or are you looking at that professional deputy, that professional financial deputyship application? Okay, so in terms of deputyship, obviously a deputyship allows management of both kind of financial decisions and also health and welfare decisions, so a person can live their life to their fullest and not be restricted just because they lack capacity. Unfortunately, we've seen people where they've just stayed in supported living because they've been unable to give notice or enter into a new tenancy agreement, and because they don't have that deputyship, and it's potentially not obviously fair for them because it's not in their best interest to stay there. So it's a strength to have the deputyship in place, because then you have that. Deputyships last for a lifetime. So it will only end if all the deputies, unfortunately, are unable to act, or the person is no longer with us. So deputyships are lifetime orders. It will also end if the person does regain capacity as well. There's also protection through a bond insurance. So you may have heard of a security bond. So this is something that's required when a deputyship order is in place. So this is just basically insurance. So it's like your insurance, your car insurance that you pay yearly. It's a lot cheaper than car insurance, but it's basically just like car insurance. You pay on a yearly basis, and then it just covers P, the person. So if anything happens to any of their finances, the court can then claim it back from the security bond and the insurance. Also, to confirm, the security bond is also paid from P's estate, so the person's bank account. The deputyship, the deputy is not personally liable for that. Also, the OPG keep a register of the named deputies. So if they have any concerns, they'll raise them with you, whoever the deputy is. And they also do spot checks. So we had a OPG visit last year that just turned up and wanted to see our files to check that we were acting in best interests. So that's a good safeguard to have, to make sure that people are actively acting in best interests. Challenges is, unfortunately, it is costly, complex and time consuming. There are ongoing reporting requirements. So you're needing to do an annual report and also fees. Again, the security bond, I've put it in both because the security bond is good to have, but it is a faff to sort out as well. It's just kind of an extra bit of paperwork that you need to complete. You could be subject to objections, whether it's family members, relatives, friends, so just be wary of that. The court orders can be very strict. So once you do get a court order, you do need to have a look through it and make sure you're aware and you understand what you're allowed to do, and what you're not allowed to do. And also, I've just put emotional roller coaster, because anything to do with court of protection, unfortunately, is very emotional, because the court likes to know all the details, and because ultimately they're making decisions on the person's behalf. So it is very emotionally draining, but that's why I suppose we do our job, because we love supporting the people and looking after them and providing that kind of hand-holding service. When you've decided that, an application needs to be made, these are the forms that are required. So this is the link. It will take you to the forms. So my advice is to front load the application. So if you're doing the application yourselves, front load the application. So what I mean is provide the court with all the information. So even if you think, I'm not sure about pushing it in, put it in, because the current waiting time for the court to issue the application is 10 weeks. And then it can take 4 months for the court to review the application. And it's better that the court has all the information to then grant the order, rather than reviewing it and asking questions and then making a further interim order, which can then delay things and just cause more stress. So definitely front load the application. So in terms of the forms that are listed here, the first form I've mentioned is the COP3. So this is your mental capacity assessment. This is your gateway to your application. Okay, you must have this form before starting to draft the other forms. Okay, the court will not consider the application unless you have that mental capacity evidence, because that's when that proves that the person lacks capacity. Okay. In terms of who will complete it, Hertfordshire County Council's position is that they can assist with the COP3 as long as they know the person, as long as they're actively involved with that person. It's completely their discretion as well. So you can ask the question if there is a social worker assigned and they're actively involved in the service users' day-to-day care. But it's completely their discretion as to whether they complete it or not. If they can't, then you can ask your GP. GPs now, I'm finding, are doing them more. However, it is at a cost. But it is worth exploring that. Some GPs have done it for us free of charge. It's completely dependent on how well they know the person as well. If you can't then get the GP for any reason, you can look at an independent social worker to do it for you. There's various companies out there who you can be referred to. But again, that is your COP3, is your gateway document that you need completed before doing any of the other documents. In terms of the COP3, when you do have a look at it, the proposed deputy will complete the first half, and then the medical professional will complete the second half. The COP one is just a standard application form. So this is a form that any application that goes to the course protection has to complete. So it's very basic. But just to flag in terms of a tip, you have to name respondents or notified persons, okay? And I know that may sound kind of legal gobbledygook, but if you have a look at the guidance to the forms, it outlines who you can have as a respondent and who you need to notify. In terms of a requirement, you have to notify the person who the application is about. So I know this is obviously going to be someone who lacks capacity, and the questions I get is, well, why are we serving them? Because they lack capacity, they're not going to understand the application we're doing. It may cause them distress, but unfortunately the court requires it, and I would advise you not to make an application without notifying that person. Okay, so you have to notify that person, and it's highly likely they're not going to give any response, but it's about noting that in the court application that you have tried to, but no response has been given. COP 1, I've put COP 1A in there, so that's your property and financial information. So that is a very lengthy form that asks for lots of information, so including benefits, bank account details, any kind of estates that they might inherit from, wills, LPAs. It's a very heavy document. If you don't know the information that is required, you can submit it as it is, and the court then may make what's called an asset search order, which then you can then take to banks for them to provide you with the information, and then you fill it out a bit more. I haven't included, but the COP 1B, if you're making a health and welfare application, a COP 1B is what's required for that one. Your COP 4 is your suitability of your deputy. So in your COP 4, it will basically ask you, as a proposed deputy, why are you suitable? Particularly with a financial deputyship application, they'll ask you, have you ever been bankrupt? Do you owe any substantial amounts of money? Just to make sure that you're willing and able and suitable to be the deputy. Your COP 24 is your witness statement. So this is where I would advise that you put all the information. So I believe it's about 3 or 4 pages long, just blank, that you can fill out online. That's just given a real background of why you're making the application, why you're acting in best interest, and just outline that all. So the court has no further questions. The court's in no doubt that the application should be made. So I put the application fee there of 421. If the person is on any type of benefits, then what you can do is you can get help with the application fee. So sometimes the court waiver the fee, or sometimes they provide a discount. So what you need to do is you need to complete a COP 44A and attach a DWP letter, the breakdown letter that you get on a yearly basis. Attach that to the court with the application, and then they should then apply the discount. I would highly recommend that in terms of the forms, have a look at that link and have a look at the guidance. The forms initially look scary, but when you go through the guidance, it is helpful. Once you've got the order, just to remind, in terms of deputies, they can only make decisions in the person's best interest. I cannot stress this enough. So there's a code of practice that must be followed. So it's what I say to my clients is, when you're acting as deputy, it's like you're stepping into the person's shoes and you're making decisions for them. So you have to put your own biases out the window and just focus on that person and what decision that person would make. You can only make the decisions that the court says you can make. So again, that's about reviewing the order and making sure you're acting in line with that. In terms of applying, you must apply a high standard of care when making decisions. So again, you're subject to the Office of Public Guardian to review what decisions you've been made, you've been making. So it's about always applying that high standard of care. Again, you have to arrange that security bond, and you must submit an annual report. So we do that regularly. In terms of the annual report, is just about detailing what decisions you've made. And if you need any help with that, we can always help with that. In terms of what the deputies cannot do, and I've just put the main kind of questions that we get asked. So they cannot restrain anybody unless it's to stop them from coming to harm. So that's when your positive behavioural support plan is important, but the deputy cannot authorise that. Okay, so that's one of the main kind of questions that get asked, particularly in terms of a health and welfare deputy. The health and welfare deputy cannot authorise that. Make a will for a person or change their existing will. Again, as a deputy, you cannot do that. Once a person has made a will, if they had capacity to do so, that's their document and it cannot be amended. If you have concerns about a will, so say the person doesn't have one, or you have concerns about where the money's going to, so say if there's been a change in relationship, then you could look at a statutory will. Again, just to stress, you cannot make a will or change a will of a person as a deputy. You cannot make large gifts out of somebody's money either. And this is a big one that the Office of Public Guardian has picked up on, particularly kind of the concerns regarding inheritance tax and everything that's been going on in terms of the media. So just to clarify, you cannot make large gifts out of somebody's money as a deputy. The Office of Public Guardian guidance is really, really good on gifting. And we can assist with that as well. But have a look at the guidance regarding that when you're appointed as a deputy. And it should be helpful. Again, this is a very common question that we get asked, is when someone's named as a deputy, how do I hold the money? Can I just put it in my own bank account? No. Okay, so you mustn't mix the person's money with your own personal money as a deputy. So you must have a separate account for them. Banks are very, very experienced now in terms of attorneyship accounts or deputyship accounts. It's just about popping in and opening an account with your deputyship order. They're very aware of that, and they normally have their own deputyship teams now because they're becoming so common. So just in terms of tips, keep copies of everything when you're a deputy. So any decisions that you've made, receipts, bank statements, just make sure that you keep an eye on what's going on, so that you can it'll make it a lot easier to do your annual report. So just in terms of, just to give you a quick, something that happened, I've got a client that we were selling a property for, and it was valued last year at, I think it was £500,000. The market's very slow at the moment, so we ended up selling it for £451,000 this year, mid this year. And the Office of Public Guardian picked us up on it and questioned why we'd sold it for so much less. Thankfully, we had the estate agent reports on our file, which we sent to the Office of Public Guardian to outline why we had lowered it. But it just shows that the Office of Public Guardian do ask questions. So it's about keeping them receipts. So I thought it would just be useful just to highlight the kind of future of deputyships. Obviously, the future of deputyships there's a great emphasis on lasting powers of attorney and planning ahead. Okay, so you may have seen it again in the media with Martin Lewis, our money saving expert. He's a big believer of lasting powers of attorney, as it is a preventative measure. As with deputyships, that's kind of fallback. So the biggest push is to make a lasting power of attorney. So 1.3 million lasting power of attorneys have been registered so far, with 1.3 million being registered this year, which is great news, because that then stops us needing the deputyship, because we have that lasting power of attorney to cover us. Putting a lasting power in place allows that person to then pick who they want to manage their finances for, or who they want to make their health and welfare decision. So it gives them the control. It's also a lot faster, a lot less complex, and a lot less expensive. But I know that's not the option for all. And I know majority of people that obviously that we're thinking about today are probably, unfortunately, don't have capacity and never had capacity to make the LPA. In terms of deputyships, if you're looking at making the deputyship yourself, as a family member or as a friend, there is a great emphasis on succession planning. So the court like to see that if, unfortunately, the main deputy, as a mother or father, for example, or a daughter is hit by a bus, sorry to sound insensitive, that there is somebody else to take on the matter of being deputy. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier, it's always advisable to name at least one. So say in Riley's situation, 25-year-old, it's highly likely that his parents will be making a deputyship application. So what you need to do is then think sister or sibling could also join them and be named as deputy. So it's all about that succession planning, and the court likes to see that. Okay. In terms of professional deputies, these are becoming a lot more common, and this is just due to the increased risk assessment and reporting requirements and the scrutiny that the deputies, unfortunately, are coming under. So you've probably seen in the news in terms of the amount of professional deputies that are now being appointed. But I didn't, in terms of the future deputies, if obviously an LPA is not an option, then having a deputyship does ensure, where a person lacks capacity, that they can still have their financial and personal care needs met. And it's all about kind of protecting that individual and ensuring that best interests are at the heart of every decision. And that kind of just gives everybody involved in that person's life, including them, peace of mind. And it's just about allowing them to live their lives as if obviously they have capacity. So that is it from me. I hope it was helpful. I'm so sorry I talked so fast, and I appreciate that it was a complete whistle-stop tour. But I'm hopeful that it was helpful to navigate through.
Thank you, Lucy. And I learned things, so I found that really, really helpful. Thank you very much. I've just got a couple of slides, really, which is just to give a bit more clarity, a bit more depth to the points on what adult care services will do. So this is about when Lucy touched on this. There are times when adult care services will make an application for deputyship. So the situation would be the person lacks the mental capacity to make decisions about their properties and finances. And there's a process whereby we assess someone's ability to make those decisions. And they have no one in their life who can make a legal decision on their behalf. So they haven't got a lasting power of attorney. And they have no one who is willing and able to apply to be a deputy. As Lucy said, if we have somebody with very simple financial arrangements, they're not much more than benefits, then our client finance team will make that application and we will be the deputy. But if they have property or complex financial assessments, we'll make the application, but we will be applying for one of those panel deputies that Lucy talked about. And it's emphasised there that we're not choosing who's going to be the deputy. We're just making that application to the Office of the Public Guardian. And we would never apply to be a personal welfare, health and welfare deputy. So when we won't make an application for deputyship, so again, we're talking about somebody who lacks capacity. So where there is somebody who has a family member or friend who can act as the deputy, the expectation would be that they would make that application. We don't get involved with work with supporting people who are 100% funded by continuing healthcare, and that's because when someone is funded, has 100% funding from continuing healthcare, all of their care needs, including social care needs, are the responsibility of the health authority and not social services. And we don't support HPFT, by which I mean people where their predominant needs relate to their mental health. We generally, I've been a bit more negative about this than Lucy, but it's just to make sure that it's clear. We generally will not be able to support you make that application to the court. If we don't know the person at all, we don't accept referrals to help with this work. We don't have a legal responsibility to have to do that. And you'll probably already be familiar that there can be quite a delay waiting for us to respond to the requests for where we do have a duty to work with somebody. Generally, those requests to us are about that COP3, that form about mental capacity. And the request is really for us to do a Mental Capacity Act assessment. So as Lucy said, where we know the person and we can actually complete that form without really doing very much more work, we will do. But even where we know somebody, if in fact we would be having to take on a whole new piece of work in order to fill in that COP3, then I'm afraid we are likely to decline to do that. So this is this is a whole plethora of links and information about how you can find someone to do some of those activities for you. So as Lucy said, there are companies that have social workers who can undertake capacity assessments. There's something there about finding solicitors as well who can support. We cannot, Adult Care Services can never recommend any individual person or any individual company or organisation to act for you in any way. So that's why I'm sharing all those links. And a lot of those are sitting on our internet, so you'd be able to find them there as well. But that's all. I just wanted to just clarify those points from Adult Care Services.